This is the craziest part, is that after reading the first 7 paragraphs or so of Bleak House, only 4 out of 85 students could be said to have actually read it and understood it. And yet all of them said they could read the rest of the 900-page novel no problem. Part of the problem is how everyone thinks it's cool to be talented, it's cool to be brilliant, it's cool to be famous, but trying to do any of those things is cringe. The researchers are like so desperate to see them reading well that they've even papered over this one mistake in their best example of reading. I came across this really interesting paper from 2015, which is called They Don't Read Very Well, a study of the reading comprehension skills of English majors at 2 Midwestern universities. Now, people have been talking a lot since ChatGPT has been in the news about the decline in reading comprehension and just the short form content and this sort of loss of intelligence and focus in the culture. And my point here is not to shit all over young students. Like, I have been a high school English teacher myself, and I am not trying to, make this into a generation war thing. Obviously, we want to look at the social and technological forces that are causing these changes. And I think this study really revealed one of the biggest ones to me, which is, first of all, even the English teachers that we're training are not as competent as they should be for high school English. Of course, to be a high school English teacher, you have to graduate college English. But what's happening is basically teachers and students alike are allowing themselves to pretend like they're actually getting it, right? You read Shakespeare, you read Dickens, and you say, yeah, they're so good, they're so important and special. And then you don't actually know what they're even saying on a literal level. And that comes out in this study so much. And then after I take a look at the study, I am going to go and take the test myself. This study had 85 university college English majors read the first 7 paragraphs of Charles Dickens' Bleak House. And I'm going to go and read it myself with the aid of ChatGPT, pretending that I'm a college English major who's studying this text. It's interesting because in the original study 10 years ago, they told the students, you can use Google, you can use Wikipedia, you can use dictionaries, take as long as you want, just tell me in your own words what every sentence means. And as we're going to see, one of the biggest problems was even with the tools available then, Google, Wikipedia, students were not actually resorting to them when they needed to. And the biggest distinguishing factor of the strongest readers was they noticed when they misunderstood something, they noticed when they encountered a new word, and they actually went and looked it up. Now, those students were, to begin with, the students with the best vocabulary, and so it's not surprising that they were the best readers in the study. But why did they have such good vocabularies to begin with? Well, probably they're the naturally more intelligent students. That's a part of it. But the other study habit thing is they had they were willing and active readers, and they were humble enough to say, I don't know what this means, and I'm not going to pretend to. Let me just look up this word. So if you stop watching this video now, that would be the takeaway. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see the specific examples of what these high school students said, or these university students said. And remember, some of these students are future high school English teachers because they're English majors. Let's just take a look at the study. I'll try to hone in on the key points. So I've already explained the basic setup of the study. And they're college English majors, right? And they said this hasn't really been studied, right? We study a lot of the earlier languages, like primary school and high school stuff, but we wanted to actually see at a university level, because a big part of the problem that they point out is that teachers are basically assuming that their students understand it. And I've seen it myself. I taught English in China. It was so common to just talk over the students' heads And, oh, they get it, they get it. And then when you actually ask them a question, it's very clear they don't get it. But you just move on, right? It's too embarrassing for everybody to pretend that nobody gets it. And so, yeah, they introduced the sample, right? I'm going to read the whole Dickens passage later. And the method that they used was the so-called talk aloud method, which is just you have someone say out loud to a recorder, a facilitator, okay, read me the sentence out loud, and then in your own words, translate it into so-called normal English, which is something that's a great reading strategy as a student. And you can even do this for your whole reading life. Read something out loud and rephrase it in your own words. Our principal concern was to test whether the subjects had reached a level of proficient prose literacy, which is defined by the Department of Education as the capability of reading lengthy, complex, abstract prose texts, as well as synthesizing information and making complex inferences. So that's the definition of proficiency, and we'll just see how even the mediocre students barely met that. Like, spoiler alert, 4 out of 85 students met their proficiency in reading prose bar. So they say, why did they choose Dickens' novel? It contains complex sentences and language that moves from the literal to the figurative. And this is the crazy part. They say it's important for English education students who often are called on to teach Great Expectations and A Tale of Two Cities in high schools. Our assumption was that English majors who study similar types of literature and are trained in poetic languages should be able to look up unfamiliar references and understand most of the literal meaning from this novel's first paragraphs. That assumption was wrong in 2015, and it's going to be even more off the mark today in 2025. So they give some details about their literacy level, but coming into the thing. But they say the majority of them did not enter college with the proficient prose reading level. And so this gets at the issue of they fall behind the formal text. By college, they're not prepared to read college level texts. In high school, they're reading high school level texts like Great Expectations, and they're not prepared for it then. And this gap opens up, and the teachers and the students and the system both persist in pretending, oh, well, we're still teaching the classics, we're still teaching the greats. And it's no, you're not. We've diverged a long time ago. It would be better if we would just get realistic and say, okay, I know it's high school, but why don't we return to some easier stuff? And we'll fill in the gaps. I don't know, but I'll get to recommendations and ideas later, but they go into more of the data that they gathered on their demographics and tests. They say they start out by asking the students, can you name some authors from America and Britain in the 18th century, 19th century? And this is the big key that's missing above and beyond vocabulary. They say, according to Wolfgang Iser, in the act of reading, one's ability to read complex literature is partly dependent on one's knowledge of what he calls the repertoire of the text, the form of references to earlier works or to social and historical norms, or to the whole culture from which the text has emerged. With Bleak House, this knowledge is crucial. And I've written in my notes here, compounding gap. This tends to get worse and worse because, in your early education, you're supposed to learn, if as an American student, you start to learn the basic facts. Well, England is a country on the other side of the ocean. England is an island, right? England has this big city called London, and there's this big river that goes through it that's called the Thames. Then you read more complicated works that reference those things, and your knowledge of history and geography and culture expands that way. But when we keep pretending that, I know that word, you never look up the word Thames. You just you never catch up because you insist on pretending that you know it. But and the tests were basically that, they don't remember what they studied in high school, and they don't remember what they've allegedly been tested on and passed on. And this must be getting worse in the AI era. And the thing is, like, I think AI is actually promising on this point. Like, AI knows the repertoire. AI knows large language models like ChatGPT. They know the basic facts of 19th century history. There's been so much writing on Charles Dickens, right? They have access to all the dictionaries in their training data. So it should be even better than Spark Notes if the students were willing to actually resort to it. But anyways, we'll get to that later. I'm going to do the ChatGPT test. So they said that we're letting the students Google, but we're making a note of it when they actually do. And they found that the students were, especially in the lower two categories of proficiency, the students were just rarely, I don't want to say they were too lazy, but it's like they were too discouraged. And they felt that their own mediocre or very partial understanding of the text was good enough to keep moving on. And this is the craziest part, is that after reading the first 7 paragraphs or so of Bleak House, only 4 out of 85 students could be said to have actually read it and understood it. And yet all of them said they could read the rest of the 900-page novel no problem. And that is the most standout point in this paper for me. It's delusional, and I don't blame the students so much as I blame the teachers and the society that has allowed this to come to be. And this is why I actually gave up teaching English. And I won't take a job teaching literature, especially in China, at a high school level, or even maybe a university level, reading this article. Because everyone around you has already accepted, well, they're not really going to understand Shakespeare. Like, we're just going to pretend to read it. And everybody's going to be told, good job, you read Shakespeare, when you didn't. Good job, you read a Dickens novel. All you did was passing your eyes over the words is not reading. And this isn't an indictment of anybody whose reading level is still lower than a university level. It's just an indictment of the people who won't even be realistic about where we're at. And be honest with themselves and their students. Because there's this prestige associated with education and literacy that people are hesitant to give up. And so, okay, this is the meat of the study. This is their major, these are their major conclusions in 5 bullet points. Okay, so they say that 58% understood so little of the introduction that they would not be able to read the novel. However, they also believe they would have no problem reading the rest of the 900 pages. 2, problematic readers, this is their worst category of reader, or their weakest category of reader, often describe their reading process as skimming and using Spark Notes. Today, it would be ChatGPT. The majority of the 85 subjects use vague generalizations to summarize compound, complex sentences, and we'll see some of those examples. 38% could understand more vocabulary and figures of speech than the problematic readers, but they could interpret only about half. So 38% are getting like half the literal meaning. And only 5%, 4 out of 85, had a detailed, literal understanding of the first paragraphs. And I don't want to be too picky here, right? I don't know how I would have done in high school. I don't know if you tested me in high school or university on these 7 paragraphs. I don't know where I would have scored. Now, I can even see in the example they give from the 5% of competent readers, I can even see some minor mistakes there. But we'll get to that. So, yeah, the weakest group, they quickly get lost and then they flounder through it. And I believe that they've come to accept that that's what reading is supposed to feel like, right? They say, oh, well, you know, the point is your teacher makes you read something that's way too hard for you and you immediately get lost and you just try to not make that too obvious, right? And you avoid actually checking in the dictionary or translating things. But the key is the strongest readers, the 4 students who actually could read Dickens. They immediately recognized when they were lost, and they paused and used tactics to actually discover meaning and connect meaning for the clauses and phrases in an extended sentence. And to begin with, they understood more of the concrete details because they had bigger vocabularies. And that allowed them to follow more of the actual narrative. I was tempted to think, should I put the actual opening paragraph at the start of my video? And I wanted to do that so people could have an understanding of their own familiarity and their own reading ability with Dickens. But then I thought, well, if you put a paragraph of reading homework at the start of a YouTube video, no one's going to watch it. So we'll get to, if you're still with me, we will get to the actual language of Dickens in a few moments. But here's the thing that the problematic readers did. They said they frequently looked up a word they did not know, realized that they did not understand the sentence the word had come from, and then basically skipped and gave up, right? Just looking up the word often doesn't unlock the whole sentence because there's more missing there. So, and the thing is, like, they by the end of these 7 paragraphs, a lot of them didn't even realize they were talking about, Dickens is talking about judges, lawyers, courts. And here are the great things. Here are the actual examples. So we're getting examples now from the problematic readers, the majority of the university English majors who couldn't read Dickens. Original text: London, Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Subject says, and I don't know exactly what Lord Chancellor is. A person of authority, so that's probably what I would go with. Sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall, which would be like maybe like a hotel or something. So 10-second pause. The student is clicking on her phone and breathing heavily. Okay, so Michaelmas term is the first academic term of the year. So Lincoln's Inn Hall is probably not a hotel, ha ha ha. 16 seconds of breathing, chair creaking. Then she whispers, I'm just going to skip that. The subject was far from alone in her process, a situation we explored from a wider perspective. So the 3 main tactics they used, oversimplifying, guessing, and commenting. And they give examples of how this works in the weak readers. Original text: fog up the river where it flows among green heights and meadows, fog down the river where it rolls defiled among the tiers of shipping and the waterside pollutions of a great and dirty city. Facilitator: okay. Subject: there's just fog everywhere. A few minutes later: fog creeping into the cabooses of collier brigs, fog lying out on the yards and hovering in the rigging of great ships, fog drooping on the gunwales of barges and small boats. Okay, I'm going to rewind here because I can't actually wait to do the reading itself now. So I'm going to admit, even as an English teacher myself and a proficient reader myself, I had to look up a word in this passage. The heights that Dickens mentions, the river flows among heights, green heights and meadows. I looked up the word heights in the Oxford English Dictionary, and it said they're little islands in a river, especially the Thames River. So it makes sense why this is a rare word to see. Rare geography words, rare landscape words. I'm always learning new ones because, you know, we're much more urban now, and also it sounds like people just use these for talking about the Thames heights, right? But there's more in this sentence that I had to actually pause and think about, right? I mean, Dickens says the tiers of shipping. I don't really know what he means by that, and maybe later we'll ask ChatGPT, but I'm imagining, okay, this is stacks of things, right? Or maybe there's actually levels at the wharf of like elevation. But I wouldn't really characterize that as a guess, the tiers of shipping. I don't know exactly what the docks and the wharves were like in London in the 19th century, but I get enough of what tiers of shipping means that I can be satisfied that, well, I'm not really guessing. I literally know what the words tiers mean and shipping means in this sentence, if I don't know exactly what picture Dickens is trying to paint. And then in the next passage, fog creeping into the cabooses of collier brigs. So there's actually 3 words here that a high school student would probably need to look up, or a university student even. Caboose, collier, and brig. I think a lot of Americans know that a caboose is the last train of a car because people often like to make the joke that a butt is a caboose. But we barely know about trains anymore, and we barely know about ships anymore. But I had to look up this exact meaning because it confused me. I said, well, caboose is part of a train, I thought. I know collier comes from coal, so these are coal brigs. And I know a brig is a type of ship. I don't know exactly what it is. To be honest with you, I didn't look up exactly what a brig is. Obviously, if it's a collier brig, it's just some kind of small, slow boat that carries big loads of coal. But I looked up caboose, and it turns out a caboose in this context is like a little room on top of a particularly a commercial merchantman vessel where you have cooks, where you have like cast iron grills, and you can actually have a fire, right? Because most of a boat, you don't want fires. So a caboose, before it was a U.S. thing for like where the workers on a train do shit, it was apparently an English nautical term with an uncertain etymology. But anyways, that I get it why high school students don't want to do that when they're just reading, right? It interrupts the flow, and it's more work to actually go crack a dictionary. It's never been easier with digital dictionaries and ChatGPT to actually check, okay, what does it mean? Later, we'll see if ChatGPT can actually help us with this exact usage of caboose, of collier brigs. And then later on, of course, we're probably likely to also have, I believe the gunwales are like the rim around the edge of a boat, barges, A lot of students would not necessarily look up all these words. But to get back to the actual study, what does the student make of this? They say, oh, I know there's a train and there's like the industrial parts of the city. So they've already made a mistaken leap because they haven't recognized that this whole sentence is about boats and fog among the boats. And it's, of course, the middle of London, and we've been talking about the river, so trains haven't really entered into the narrative anywhere else. But they've been misled by the word caboose, an understandable mistake that I made myself, but they've done nothing to correct it. And also, they probably didn't know the word brig, yard, rigging, gunwale, because they don't see the mismatch between talking about trains and boats at the same time. Okay, going on. The biggest, and one of the other big strategies. 96% of the problematic readers used oversimplified phrases to summarize a sentence in the test passage, while 61% used this method for 5 or more sentences. One subject disclosed that oversimplifying was her normal tactic, explaining, I normally don't try to analyze individual sentences as I'm reading something. I try to look at the overall bigger picture of what's going on. And it's kind of cute to say this. It's also kind of arrogant because you're saying, well, I'm a big picture person. I don't concern myself with the details. And it's like a way of justifying to yourself the fact that you're missing all the details. And then the next quote, another subject said that she separated reading from thinking. I'm just reading it. I'm not thinking about it yet. And I think I know why students do this. It's because they're expected to show proficiency. They're expected to signal that they're intelligent. This is something that the writer Frederick de Boer wrote about in his book, The Cult of Smart, and he's constantly talking about. Our society puts such an emphasis on intelligence as our test of who gets the good jobs, who gets into good schools, that people are really, really reluctant to reveal either an innate low IQ or that they're actually undertrained and not very proficient in intellectual skills. So that's how you get college English majors saying like, oh, I'm not looking at the individual sentences. I look at the big picture. And it's like, I forgive this student. I don't want to judge this student too harshly, but her statement is a really a red flag. The second most commonly used tactic by problematic readers was guessing. Instead of looking up the definition, they often guessed. So again, you do that for the same reason. Okay, and here's the example of it. Dickens' original: on such an afternoon, if ever, the Lord High Chancellor ought to be sitting here, as here he is, with a foggy glory round his head, softly fenced in with crimson cloth and curtains, addressed by a large advocate with great whiskers, a little voice, and an interminable brief, and outwardly directing his contemplation to the lantern in the roof, where he can see nothing but fog. And the student replies, describing him in a room with an animal, I think? Great whiskers? And here the facilitator laughs, and the subject says, a cat. And remember, the facilitator is not allowed to correct or explain anything. So they actually kind of break the rules a bit by laughing, because the facilitator obviously knows these are face whiskers. This is the beard of a lawyer in the court. And to be thinking that there's a cat here, it's you've really gone off the rails. You've lost the plot. Note that the subject, who is not accessing any of the concrete details, finds a subject, the Lord Chancellor, and one recognizable word, whiskers, and concludes that the character is in a room with a cat. At this point, she does not seem to understand what she's reading, and so she links a few words together to form some kind of response. Finally, our subjects with the most challenges relied on commenting, that is, giving personal reactions to the text instead of trying to interpret it. Sometimes they generalize so vaguely in a comment that it would be hard to know if they really understood what they had read. And here's the example. Facilitator: okay, I'll stop you there. What do you take from that passage? Subject: I think he's trying to basically give the atmosphere of where things are at the time, trying to build the scene. The subject consistently turned to commentary to avoid translating Dickens' language altogether. I mean, I think these are really obvious strategies of students to try desperately to earn marks, to gain points, to talk in a literary sounding way during this reading test without revealing just how little they are understanding. And it's reinforcing this idea that, oh, well, aesthetics is just vibes, right? Like, oh yeah, like really great atmosphere in this painting and this book, and it's just like he's really building the scene. It's like, that's always true, right? There's always an atmosphere in a scene, whether it's elaborated or not. And it's an empty comment, of course, to say, he's coloring things. What are the colors? I get frustrated, but I really don't want to seem like I'm talking down. It's just personally, it's disappointing to me that, I would love to be an English teacher again, but it's such an uphill battle when the students come in with such a low level. You're asked, teach them Dickens, teach them Shakespeare. And then everyone has to pretend like that's what's actually happening. So problematic readers were continually challenged by the figures of speech that are woven into the novel's descriptions. And here's an example. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth. And would it not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus, 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill? And the student goes, haha, so it's like the mud was all in the streets and no. So everything's been like kind of washed around, and we might find megalosaurus bones, but he says they're waddling all up the hill. The subject cannot make the leap to figurative language. She first guesses that the dinosaur is just bones, and then is stuck stating that the bones are waddling all up the hill, because she can see that Dickens has the dinosaur moving. Because she cannot logically tie the ideas together, she just leaves her interpretation as is and goes on to the next sentence. Like this subject, most of the problematic readers were not concerned if their literal translation of Bleak House were not coherent, so obvious logical errors never seemed to affect them. In fact, none of the readers in this category ever questioned their own interpretations of figures of speech, no matter how irrational the results. Worse, their inability to understand figurative language was constant, even though most of the subjects had spent at least 2 years in literature classes that discussed figures of speech. And this next point is just, I wish there were a whole other paper about this, but this is something that you can't really study because it's more like a social and a cultural criticism. This next point. Why would all the problematic readers be so sure they could read the rest of Bleak House on their own when they had such trouble understanding the first 7 paragraphs of the novel? According to their responses, many subjects defined reading Bleak House as skimming the text and relying on SparkNotes to understand what they had just read. And SparkNotes is now going to be replaced by ChatGPT, where you just ask ChatGPT to explain it to you. And the great thing about ChatGPT is it can go in a lot more detail than SparkNotes. It can go in any direction you want it to, whereas SparkNotes is static. But the problem is, just like with SparkNotes, if a high school English student or a college English student is using ChatGPT to understand things, and they're not actually thinking or remembering it, they're just kind of like using ChatGPT to like get them over the edge of the exams, it's going to be not any more effective than SparkNotes. The key is the activeness to use ChatGPT when you need it. And I think this problem is going to persist and be made even worse, because now the students might not even read the 7 paragraphs. They might just feed the 7 paragraphs into ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, tell me what these 7 paragraphs are saying, which is objectively worse than going to SparkNotes. Or maybe it's not. I mean, SparkNotes tells you like chapter by chapter, like, I don't know. We'll see what happens anyways. But moving on with the study, several of the problematic readers in this category admitted they'd successfully used skimming and SparkNotes to read Jane Austen's novels and Shakespeare's plays in other English classes. So, Shakespeare is even harder than Dickens. And Shakespeare is also poetry, where skimming is even worse than in prose. Okay, so it's really bleak. Bleak school. So competent readers, this was their next up category. This was 38%. They're getting, remember, these are the ones the researchers say they're getting about half the meaning. Okay, so they read the first passage about the Lord Chancellor in Lincoln's Inn Hall and the Megalosaurus. And the facilitator says, okay, I'm going to ask you to kind of explain. Oh, okay. Okay, 2 characters, it's pointed out, this Michaelmas and Lord Chancellor described as sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Talk about the November weather, mud in the streets. I do probably need to look up Megalosaurus, so it's probably some kind of animal or something or another that is talking about encountering on the street and wandering like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. So, yup, I think we've encountered some kind of animal. These characters have met in the street. Yup, I think we've encountered some kind of animal, and these characters have met in the street. The subject does not really understand what is happening in the passage and makes guesses that do not help her comprehension. For example, she decides that Michaelmas term is a person instead of a set term, September or late October to December, for law courts and universities. She also does not look up Megalosaurus, though she says she will, and assumes the word means some kind of an animal, which ensures that she will not notice the figurative image of a dinosaur walking down a London street. So, if this is the type of passivity where you say, I should probably look that up, but nah, I never get around to it, you're going to give up reading a 900-page novel. Because you're not going to understand it, and you're not going to get any pleasure from the metaphors, right? Like, when Dickens alludes to the Great Flood, the biblical flood, and he calls back dinosaurs, he's bringing this pleasurable contrast of thinking about modern, urban, contemporary, for Dickens, contemporary London, with just like biblical levels of like weather and you know, I'd have to think about it to see like what is really going on with this dinosaur Bible reference. But it's, if you just don't get it at all, you don't have the pleasure of recognition, right? Like as like a smug, experienced reader, I'm like, oh, he's referencing the Great Flood, and oh, haha, like, wouldn't that be droll if a megalosaurus were to walk up the hill? It's I guess younger people might call it cringe to actually learn those things, or to be I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but I mean, I think part of the problem is how everyone thinks it's cool to be talented, it's cool to be brilliant, it's cool to be famous, but trying to do any of those things is cringe. And so that's why you have to pretend and say, "Oh, you know, I get it. Yeah, it's like an animal, a megalos." You're just you're missing the point. Okay, so moving on, and he's saying like even the competent readers, half of the competent readers had no idea the passage was focused on lawyers and a courtroom, which is a big misunderstanding, because Dickens is making like a political argument that's actually quite timeless. Like, we're going to read the 7 paragraphs later, but by the end of the 7 paragraphs, with all this metaphor of mud and fog, he's worked up to this powerful indictment, this hatred of lawyers and courts. And the very final line of those 7 opening paragraphs hits so hard. It's honestly fire, and we'll get to it later. And yeah, that is something that the students are not getting. We're wasting their time. We're forcing them to read Bleak House and take all these texts in university, and they're not even getting the juiciest bits out of it. And that's only going to make them less likely to finish the novel, to actually look up terms. But moving on, let's see what happens to proficient readers. Okay, they stood out because they continually looked up words they did not know. They could also recognize figurative language and avoided the trap of translating metaphors and similes literally. Of one of the proficient readers successfully interpreting something happening. Foot passengers jostling one another's umbrellas in a general infection of ill temper, and losing their foothold at street corners, where tens of thousands of other foot passengers have been slipping and sliding since the day broke, if this day ever broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud, sticking at those points tenaciously to the pavement, and accumulating at compound interest. The subject's interpretation, and he's talking about foot traffic within the city. I said London first, I didn't say that out loud, but it's taking place in London, and he's talking about the foot traffic and how the weather is creating an ill temper between people, and everybody's jostling and fighting with each other for a position on streets that are paved. It's not a pavement, it's a mess, so it's not perfectly smooth and level. And so people are slipping and sliding on cobblestone or whatever it happens to be, and he's connecting that with the past and saying how they're just the latest generation of people to be walking and jostling in bad weather through these stones that other people have gone before them and done these exact same things, and it accumulates at compound interest, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud, sticking at these points tenaciously to the pavement, and accumulating. I'm assuming compound interest means it's interest on top of interest, so it's the mud is growing exponentially, if you will. And that's one whole paragraph right there. Okay, so good job to this, one of the 5% of students that could actually read this passage. And the researchers say, instead of making a generalized statement to summarize the entire sentence, the subject carefully attempts to interpret each successive clause. And it's clear. But I want to actually mention that even the researchers here are so desperate for like a positive example of one of the students. He says the student finds a good way to explain the clause by stating that the people in the sentence are just the latest generation to be walking in the mud that day. Now, they're actually not pointing out the student's mistake. The student has missed a figure of speech here, a hyperbole. Dickens is saying tens of thousands of people this day alone have been slipping at those spots. And obviously that may be a bit too high. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Dickens is just trying to emphasize like the excessiveness of this and the chaos of this mud and these streets. But the student sees the number 10,000 and actually kind of assumes he's talking about, Dickens is saying, in history, the whole duration of this street, tens of thousands of people, and he's saying, oh, they're just the latest generation. I think that's where the student gets generation from. They see tens of thousands, they probably think that's too high for one day, but they've missed the fact that Dickens is poetically exaggerating, right? It's only 19th century London. We're not living in a world with 8 billion people yet. So even to have thousands of people cross a street in one day is already a lot. But Dickens is going one level up. He's saying tens of thousands. So not to belabor this point, but it's like, and it's only a university student, right? I forget which year this is, but the researchers are like so desperate to see them reading well that they've even papered over this one mistake in their best example of reading. And then they said, finally, the proficient reader's knowledge of historical details, whether 19th century pollution from coal, child labor, or the custom of judges wearing wigs, allowed these readers to fill in some context. Okay, so they go on and have a little end part about dropping literacy. And of course, this was 10 years ago. It's gotten worse in the US, in every English-speaking country. And this is their conclusion. If we teachers in the university ignore our students' actual reading levels, we run the risk of passing out diplomas to students who have not mastered reading complex texts and who, as a result, might find that their literacy skills prevent them from achieving their professional goals and personal dreams. So, I mean, I agree with half of this, right? You can't ignore university students' reading levels and just pass out diplomas if they can't even read Dickens. It's absurd. It's fake. It's hollow. But they're saying the problem with this is the students are being kept from their professional goals and personal dreams. I agree with that, but at a societal level, not everybody is going to achieve their professional goals because it's a competitive labor market. The universities are meant to sort people into classes of worker. And the weird thing is, they don't actually have to teach people to do that. All you have to do is curve people and filter people, right? So you just take the best readers and you give them the jobs as high school English teachers or as university English professors. And it doesn't really matter that they're still below an understanding of Dickens that we would find good. They're just the best we have. And so it doesn't matter if the whole group slips down from the perspective of a meritocracy. And that's only going to get worse with ChatGPT. We're just going to say, oh, well, like everybody's getting less literate, but we're still going to give the best jobs to the most literate. And the system doesn't really need to change until, this starts to result in actual problems. And we're going to notice these, right? Like we're probably going to notice, oh, this engineer used ChatGPT, this lawyer used ChatGPT, and the problems that result from that, right? So, yeah, that was that. I think I'm going to make the Dickens Bleak House video a separate video. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this paper. I will link the passage in Bleak House. I encourage you to go read it. Give yourself all the time you have, all the time you want, use whatever tools you have, but like see, how well can you really read Dickens Bleak House? What do you need to actually look up and fill in? But yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive. Um, I feel smug as somebody who has the ability to read Dickens. Um, but of course, it's come at a cost, right? I can't go and teach English because it's going to frustrate me too much to have all this bullshit. So this is one of the paradoxical results of it. Like, I don't know. Anyways, rambling video. I hope somebody watches this and looks into it. But yeah, subscribe if you want more. I know this is sloppy, but when you have no followers, this is the level of production quality that you really feel is worth it. So yeah, let me know what you thought, and I'm gonna upload another video where I actually go through the 7 opening paragraphs of Bleak House and see what ChatGPT can and can't teach me. So look out for that.